The smell of searing meat drifted through the warm Colorado air as I stepped into my mother's backyard, a place that had once felt safe before years of tension carved it into familiar territory for unspoken dread. Laughter rose around the picnic tables, thin and strained, like everyone feared breaking something fragile. I was 28 and already exhausted in ways no doctor could measure, the kind of tired that grows from decades of keeping your voice low, so someone else's temper does not catch fire. My brother Connor stood near the grill with a beer dangling from his hand, shoulders loose in the way men look when they believe the world owes them applause. He had been drinking since noon, judging by the sluggish swagger in his walk and the faint redness creeping across his cheeks. My mother hovered behind him, fussing over potato salad and paper plates, pretending not to notice how his voice sharpened whenever his eyes landed on me. She always pretended. Pretending was easier than admitting her golden son had grown into a man who cracked open rooms with his rage. Emily the helper. Emily the quiet one. Emily the sister who never fought back that version of me, made everyone's life simpler, and everyone expected her to show up again today. But beneath my polite smile, something thrummed a pulse of warning that felt older than my bones. Connor lifted the spatula like it was a microphone and grinned at the cousins who circled him like admiring spectators. Then he called out to me in a voice soaked with contempt that felt rehearsed for years. "Look who finally decided to show up, our little public health princess." Connor sneered, stretching the words until they curled with mockery. What does she do again? Charts paperwork. Nothing real. Nothing. That matters. A few relatives chuckled the way people do when they are afraid not to. My mother stiffened but said nothing. She never said anything that might rattle the fragile peace she worshipped more than truth. I folded my arms, trying to anchor myself against the sting rising behind my ribs. The heat from the grill pulsed at my side, and the metallic scent of burning fat pressed against the back of my throat. Connor stepped closer, swaying slightly, beer sloshing against the lip of the bottle. "You know why she is still single," he announced, "because no one wants a woman who thinks she is better than her family." His words sliced the air cleanly. The backyard fell into the familiar hush of people watching a disaster they pretend they cannot stop. I felt every pair of eyes tilt toward me like spotlights demanding a reaction. My breath hitched, but I held my posture steady because breaking in front of Connor had always been dangerous. He fed on humiliation the way fire feeds on oxygen. He took another slow step and pressed 2 fingers against my shoulder in a gesture that looked playful from a distance, but felt like a warning beneath the skin. "Come on, Emmy, smile for the family," he murmured. "You ruin every gathering with that sad little face." I swallowed hard, tasting smoke and something metallic that might have been fear. When he shoved me the first time, it was light, more insult than injury, a reminder of the hierarchy he believed we lived in. I steadied myself and stared at the line of mountains beyond the fence, wishing I could disappear into them. But the second shove came fast, violent, and so hard it knocked the breath from my lungs. My back slammed into the hot curve of the grill, the metal branding heat through my shirt and into my skin. The sizzle was faint but unmistakable, and a flash of white pain shot up my spine. I did not scream. I could not. For a moment, all sound dropped away except the hiss of meat fat meeting metal and the ragged thump of my pulse. The world tilted in a slow, dizzy arc as I pushed myself forward, peeling my back from the searing heat. Gasps rippled through the yard, but no one stepped between us. Not one cousin, not one uncle, not even my mother, who clutched a bowl to her chest like a shield. She rushed toward me finally, but not with concern etched across her face. Instead, she shouted the words that had chased me through childhood like shadows that refused to release me. "Stop provoking your brother! Look what you made him do!" Her voice cracked and trembled as if she were the victim of some tragedy I had orchestrated. I stared at her, stunned by how quickly she had rewritten the scene in her mind, turning my pain into his excuse. Connor smirked triumphant, certain the moment would end, like every confrontation before it, with my silence. But something inside me snapped with a quiet finality that felt almost gentle, like the soft click of a lock sliding into place. I straightened, ignoring the sting clawing across my back, and looked directly at Connor for the first time in years without flinching. His grin wavered just slightly enough for me to see the boy he once was buried under the man he had chosen to become. The yard spun with whispered judgment and uneasy shifting feet. I realized in that suspended breath of silence that if I did not save myself now, I would spend the rest of my life letting this moment replay in different shapes forever, trapped in a cycle someone else designed. The mountains loomed beyond the fence, steady and unmoved by the chaos unfolding beneath them. I felt something mirror that steadiness inside me, a quiet resolve that did not burn or rage but settled like ground forming beneath my feet. Surviving was not living. I had survived him for 27 years. I would not survive him for 27 more. That was the moment I finally understood surviving was not living, and this time I would not give in. I grew up in a small Colorado town where the mountains looked close enough to touch, but freedom always felt just out of reach, the kind of place where your reputation formed before you learned to spell your own name, and where family history carried more weight than personal truth. My earliest memories hold the echo of my father's laugh drifting through the hallway and the way he lifted me with ease, his hands warm and calloused from years of construction work. He died when I was 5, crushed under the frame of a house that never got finished, and from that moment, the balance in our home shifted in a way I did not have words for until adulthood. My mother went quiet after his funeral. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the brittle kind that cracks if pressed too hard. She clung to Connor, who was 8 at the time, as if he were the last surviving piece of the world she once understood. People whispered that she spoiled him because he reminded her of our father, but that was not quite it. She spoiled him because she feared losing another man. I became the child who learned to need little so she could save what little energy she had for him. As siblings, we were never equals, even when we were small. Connor discovered early that he could shatter rules without consequence. When he broke my toys, he blamed me, and Mom believed him. When he pushed me down the stairs during a game of tag, he insisted I tripped, and again, she believed him. Each lie reinforced a pattern, and each pattern stitched itself into my understanding of how the world worked. Boys were forgiven before they asked. Girls earned love only by staying quiet. I learned to swallow tears fast to keep noise from turning into trouble. Silence became my armor before I learned to tie my shoes. School was the only place where silence worked in my favor. Teachers described me as focused, diligent, observant. They did not know that I watched everything because watching was safer than participating. They mistook survival instincts for maturity. At home, the roles calcified. Connor was the center of every conversation, even when he was not in the room. Mom hovered over his homework, packed his lunches, woke early to make his favorite waffles. I made my own. When he threw tantrums, she rushed in like a firefighter arriving at a blaze, afraid of what damage might spread. When I cried, she told me to be strong for the family. The message grew roots inside me. Strength meant swallowing everything that hurt. During middle school, Connor's temper worsened and the house felt smaller every year. He slammed doors hard enough to rattle picture frames, screamed at Mom when she denied him something, and shoved me in passing whenever his anger needed a target. I grew good at shrinking myself into corners and slipping out of rooms before he noticed me. At 13, I discovered that the safest place in the house was the public library 2 blocks down the street. I spent hours between its shelves tracing the lives of people who lived far away from boys like Connor and mothers like mine. Books taught me the world could be different, even if mine refused to change. When I entered high school, the guidance counselor asked what I wanted to do with my life, and the answer came faster than I expected. I wanted to help people who felt invisible. Public health fascinated me because it focused on prevention, understanding patterns, noticing the quiet signs before disaster struck. It mirrored the way I had survived my household by paying attention to what others ignored. My mother praised Connor for passing algebra and shrugged when I made the honor roll. That was the rhythm of our lives. He received applause for small steps while I learned to celebrate my victories in silence. I worked part-time at a grocery store to save money, knowing college would never happen unless I found a way to fund it myself. Connor coasted through high school, leaving a trail of broken friendships and minor infractions. Mom defended him so fiercely that neighbors eventually stopped reporting his behavior. She said he was misunderstood, a good boy at heart, just overwhelmed by losing his father so young. I wondered whether she remembered that I had lost him too. Sometimes late at night, my mind replayed moments I tried to forget. The time Connor locked me outside in the snow when we were kids, laughing while I pounded on the door. The time he told a group of boys I liked one of them, then mocked me when they laughed. The time Mom grounded me for an entire weekend because Connor claimed I hid his video game even though it sat in plain sight on his dresser. Small wounds, but they accumulated like stones in a backpack I did not know how to take off. College was supposed to be my escape, and in many ways, it was. I attended Colorado State University on scholarships and work-study programs, staying on campus during breaks whenever I could. Distance softened the edges of home, but did not erase them. Mom called often reminding me Connor missed me, even though he never once asked to speak to me directly. Whenever she hinted that I should visit, I felt the old guilt rise like smoke from a fire I thought had burned out. Still, I returned during a few holidays, convincing myself that tolerance was the same thing as love. After graduation, I found a job coordinating outreach programs for underserved communities across the state. It was meaningful work, the kind that made the world feel bigger than the one I had grown up in. I learned to speak confidently to strangers to advocate for people who had no voice. Yet with my family, the old silence crept back with frightening ease. Around them, my confidence shrank to a whisper. Even as an adult, I became the quiet child again, conditioned to avoid triggering Connor's temper or my mother's disappointment. Looking back, I see how deeply those habits shaped me. I said yes when I wanted to say no. I apologized first, even when I had not been wrong. I ignored red flags because acknowledging them meant confronting truths that might fracture what little family structure remained. I told myself that enduring discomfort was noble, that loyalty meant staying even when staying cost me parts of myself I could not replace. But empathy does not grow evenly. Mine expanded outward toward strangers while shrinking inward toward myself. My work in public health taught me to recognize patterns of harm in communities, yet I failed to see the same patterns living under my own roof. It took me years to understand that love can coexist with damage, and that families often hide their most dangerous fractures beneath the appearance of togetherness. The irony is that the skills that made me good at my job were forged in the crucible of my childhood. I observed before acting, planned before speaking, sensed danger before anyone else noticed. Those instincts kept me safe when I was young, and they would eventually lead me toward the truth I had avoided for far too long. I was not silent because I lacked strength. I was silent because silence had been demanded of me, and beneath that silence, something patient was waiting to rise. Adulthood was supposed to feel like freedom, but for me, it felt more like distance disguised as independence, a long, quiet stretch between who I had been and who I hoped I might become. When I moved to Fort Collins after college, I carried with me a single suitcase, a used laptop, and the belief that putting miles between myself and my childhood home would finally loosen the grip of old wounds. I rented a small apartment above a bike shop, its walls thin enough that I could hear the humming of gears as customers rolled in and out. At night, the streetlight outside my window cast a soft amber glow that felt strangely comforting, as though the world itself was watching over me. I poured myself into work, the kind of outreach that took me from community centers to rural clinics to long drives through open plains where the sky looked endless. My days were filled with organizing health screenings, coordinating vaccination drives, and sitting with people who had spent years feeling unseen. It suited me. I understood invisibility better than most. The families I met, the seniors living alone, the teens searching for some place they belonged, they all reminded me of pieces of myself I was still learning to understand. Work gave me an identity beyond the roles I had been assigned at home. It gave me permission to speak, to advocate, to lead, to matter. But trauma has a way of traveling silent and uninvited. No matter how far I drove or how many lives I touched, the remnants of my past shadowed me, especially during holidays. That was when my mother would call and insist that I come home. Her voice coated in guilt and longing and something sharper beneath. She used phrases that pulled at the softest parts of me. Family first. Your brother misses you. We need you. Each request felt like a test, and each visit home a regression. The moment I stepped through the front door, my shoulders curved inward, my voice softened, and the quiet girl who survived by disappearing resurfaced. Connor rarely greeted me directly, though his presence filled the house like a storm warning. He paced, grumbled, and eyed me with a familiar mix of resentment and entitlement, as if my absence during the year was a personal betrayal. He lived with our mother, now drifting between odd jobs, usually quitting after a few weeks because a supervisor dared correct him or because coworkers did not respect him enough. Mom defended him with unwavering devotion, insisting he had potential that the world kept overlooking. She said he was grieving still, though Connor had transformed grief into a permanent excuse long before he reached adulthood. I learned quickly that calm days were illusions. The tension in the house always simmered close to the surface, waiting for a spark. If I left a light on, Connor snapped that I wasted electricity. If I bought groceries without asking, he grumbled that I was showing off. If my phone buzzed with work messages, he would smirk and say, "No real job, needed someone after 5." My mother brushed off every encounter. "He does not mean anything by it. You know how stressed he gets. Don't start something, please." These words echoed like old hymns in a familiar church. I knew every verse, and yet a part of me clung to the hope that one day she might look at me and see the years of effort I had poured into building a life untainted by chaos. But she never did. Her attention was tethered to Connor because loving him felt like her last unbroken thread to the life she had lost with my father. Sometimes I wondered whether she feared that acknowledging his cruelty would force her to confront a truth she could not bear, that she had raised a son whose anger had carved through our home like a knife. My visits grew shorter over time. I invented work obligations, volunteer commitments, and weekend trainings to justify staying away, and though some of those excuses were real, many were just shields to protect the fragile peace I was building. Still, even at a distance, the messages came. Connor's complaints peppered my phone days before every holiday. "Are you coming or not? Don't make Mom cry again. You think you're better than us." Sometimes he alternated between guilt and menace, a pattern I recognized as the cycle of control. The worst part was how normal it all felt. Normal to tense up when my phone buzzed. Normal to brace for conflict during family meals. Normal to silence my needs to preserve a peace I did not feel. Trauma disguises itself as familiarity. It makes dysfunction look like tradition. As the years passed, I dated occasionally, but relationships faltered when partners noticed how hesitant I was to voice discomfort. One boyfriend asked why I apologized every time he bumped into me by accident. Another wondered why I flinched when someone raised their voice in a crowded bar. I did not know how to explain that my body had been trained since childhood to detect danger in the smallest sounds and gestures. People expected clean explanations, not memories shaped by decades of walking on emotional glass. When I turned 27, I realized how tired I had become. Tired of shrinking. Tired of pretending home was not a battlefield. Tired of stitching myself back together after every family gathering. Therapy crossed my mind more than once, but I hesitated, worried that speaking the truth out loud might unravel everything I had spent years holding together. Yet life has a way of testing fragile structures, and mine always cracked beneath the weight of returning home. During one Christmas visit, Connor threw a remote at the wall because the internet lagged and blamed me for distracting him. The next summer, he accused me of trying to make Mom hate him because I suggested she go to a doctor for her persistent cough. Each moment chipped away at my ability to excuse him. Still, I tried. Still, I rationalized. Still, I told myself he was hurting, that he needed understanding, that family meant forgiving until there was nothing left to forgive. Looking back now, it is strange how long I stayed loyal to a version of family that never existed. I believed love meant endurance. I believed forgiveness was noble. I believed I was stronger for staying quiet. But silence does not heal. It erases. It erases the boundaries we never learned to set. It erases the pain we never admitted we felt. It erases the truth that survival is not the same as living. As my 28th birthday approached, I noticed something shifting inside me, a subtle awakening, almost imperceptible, yet persistent. I began paying attention to the way my hands shook when Connor's name lit up my phone. I noticed how my breath shortened near my mother's sighs of disappointment. I noticed how I prepared excuses weeks in advance for why I could not visit. Awareness brings clarity, and clarity brings confrontation. even if we are not ready for it. And that was when I understood the old wounds I carried were not relics of my childhood. They were living things breathing through the choices I made as an adult. They shaped my voice, my relationships, my fears, my silence. They followed me into boardrooms and community centers and quiet evenings in my apartment. Healing would never come from distance alone. Something had to break. Something had to change. And the catalyst would arrive sooner than I expected, disguised as a simple family barbecue invitation, the kind I always dreaded but never refused, until the day the simmering tension finally ignited and burned away everything I thought I knew. The invitation to the barbecue arrived in the form of a voicemail from my mother, her tone unusually bright, as if she were auditioning for a role called cheerful parent rather than speaking to her daughter. She said it would be a small gathering, nothing fancy, just family, a chance to reconnect before summer schedules pulled everyone in different directions. I listened to the message 3 times while sitting in my car outside a community center after a long day coordinating a vaccination clinic. The sun had dipped behind the mountains, casting a purple haze across the sky, the kind of view that usually soothed me, but that night my chest felt tight. Something in her voice tugged at me like an old thread threatening to unravel. I knew who would be there, and I knew he would not be happy to see me. Still, I told myself I could manage an afternoon, a few hours of discomfort in exchange for keeping the peace. That was the lie I had rehearsed for most of my life. The first red flag appeared before the weekend even arrived. Connor called me on a Wednesday evening, which he rarely did unless he needed something. His number flashed on my screen, and for a moment I considered letting it ring out, but guilt, a familiar, unwelcome companion, nudged me to answer. His voice was thick with impatience. "So you are coming Sunday, right? No greeting, no question, just an expectation." I said yes quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. He hummed a response, one that carried no warmth. "Good. Mom's been stressed enough. Do not screw this up." Then he hung up. I sat staring at the phone, unsure whether the shaking in my hands came from fear or frustration. The next red flag arrived the following morning in the form of a text from my mother. She asked if I could bring a dessert, then added a second message a few seconds later. "And try not to be late this time." It landed like an accusation disguised as a reminder. I was never late. What she meant was, "Do not upset your brother." I typed a response, then deleted it, and stared at the ceiling of my apartment, wondering when exactly my family had appointed me the keeper of someone else's rage. Work the next day offered its usual comfort, but even during a meeting about expanding mental health resources, I found myself drifting into old memories. Connor slamming doors, Connor shouting over dinner, Connor telling me to shut up because my voice annoyed him. I remembered how Mom always rushed to his defense, saying he did not mean it even when his words left bruises invisible to everyone but me. Trauma has a way of disguising itself as preparation. When my phone buzzed again that afternoon, I flinched so hard my coworker looked over with concern. It was Connor. "Need you to send me $300. Urgent." He never used greetings, pleasantries, or reasons unless they served him. My stomach tightened. I responded with a simple, "I cannot." A minute later, another message arrived. "Do not act like you are better than me." Then another. "You owe Mom after everything she has done for you." Then, "If you ignore me again, you will regret it." The words no longer shocked me, but the speed with which they escalated did. He knew exactly how to strike the softest parts of me using guilt, anger, and obligation as tools. I blocked his number for the rest of the afternoon, needing the silence to work, but dread curled inside me like smoke. If he was this volatile before the barbecue, what would he be like in person? On Friday, I received an email from my department head commending me for the success of a recent program. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt a strange ache realizing that in every part of my life I was competent and composed, yet, at home, I was still the child tiptoeing around a ticking bomb. That evening, as I locked up the community center where I had supervised an event, I saw a figure leaning against my car in the dimming light. My breath stuttered. It was Connor. His arms crossed, his posture casual only at first glance. Up close, his jaw was tight, his eyes sharp with something simmering beneath. I forced myself to walk toward him, though every instinct urged me to run back inside. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Thought we could talk," he said, sliding off the car. He smelled faintly of beer, even though it was barely 6. When I did not respond, he added, "Mom wants this barbecue to be nice. She does not need your drama." "My drama," I repeated quietly, a mix of disbelief and exhaustion washing over me. He stepped closer, too close, invading the small bubble of safety I always worked to maintain. "You think you are too good for us now," he whispered. "Driving around helping strangers while your own family falls apart. Is that what they teach you in public health?" I took a breath, steady and slow, the way I taught anxious patients during workshops. "Connor," I said evenly, "I am not giving you money, and I am not responsible for fixing your life." For a second, he froze. His eyes widened in a way that made my pulse race. I had forgotten what it felt like to say no without apology. His voice dropped lower, twisting into something cold. "You are going to regret this." He turned without another word and walked off into the parking lot, disappearing behind a row of trees. My knees weakened and I gripped the car door to stay upright as adrenaline surged through me. I stayed there for several minutes, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade before I climbed inside and locked the doors. That night, sleep refused to come. Each time I closed my eyes, his words replayed with new meaning. "You will regret this." It was not a threat shouted in anger. It was a promise said with certainty, and that terrified me more. The next day at work, I confided in a colleague about seeing someone waiting by my car without explaining it was my brother. She insisted on walking me out at the end of the day, and though I accepted, I felt a strange mixture of gratitude and shame. Why was I more willing to let strangers protect me than my own family? Saturday morning brought another message from my mother. "Please be nice to your brother tomorrow. He has been under so much pressure. He said you were cold to him." My heart clenched. Of course he did. Connor always told his version first, shaping the narrative before anyone else could speak. I typed a reply, then deleted it. My mother had made her choice long ago. Fixing Connor was easier than facing the truth of who he had become. Throughout Saturday, my mind replayed a dozen small red flags from the past year. The time he showed up uninvited at my apartment and pounded on the door until the neighbor threatened to call the police. The time he demanded my login to a streaming service, then insulted me when I said no. The time he mocked my job for being pointless, even though it helped thousands of people statewide. Each moment landed like a paper cut, barely noticeable alone, but devastating in accumulation. By evening, I recognized a truth I had spent years avoiding. Connor's behavior was not escalating. It had always been this bad. The only thing that changed was my willingness to see it. I stood by my window, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, feeling the old fear rise like a tide. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. A small spark of clarity. Red flags were not warnings about what might happen. They were reminders of what already had. And tomorrow at the barbecue, that clarity would meet reality in a way I could no longer ignore. The week before the barbecue unfolded with a tension so thick it felt like humidity clinging to my skin, a heaviness that followed me through workrooms and long stretches of highway as I drove between community sites. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, half expecting Connor's name to appear again. Though I kept his number blocked after the barrage of threats, I knew from experience that blocking him did not prevent him from finding other ways to make his presence known. By Thursday evening, the unease simmering in my stomach sharpened into something closer to dread. I arrived home after conducting a workshop on stress management for caregivers, ironic given the stress anchoring itself in my own chest. My apartment felt unusually still when I stepped inside, the kind of quiet that magnifies small sounds. I set my keys down, rolled my shoulders, and tried to shake off the day, reminding myself that 2 more nights and the barbecue would be behind me. I told myself I could handle it. I had handled worse, but avoidance is not the same thing as safety. That truth arrived in the form of pounding on my garage door late Friday afternoon. I had just returned from work and was sorting through mail when the first bang echoed through the hallway. Sharp, sudden, violent. My breath caught. For a moment, I froze, hoping I had imagined it. Then came another blow, louder this time, rattling the thin door that separated my garage from the alley. I stepped to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see who stood outside. The sight made my mouth go dry. Connor! His shoulders were hunched, his jaw tight, and his fists slammed against the metal with a force that made the entire frame vibrate. He shouted words I could not fully make out, though the fury behind them was unmistakable. I backed away, instinctively, heart thundering in my chest. He had never shown up here before. My home had always been my refuge, the one place untouched by his anger. Now even that was violated. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and dialed 911 before I could talk myself out of it. When the dispatcher answered, I kept my voice low so he could not hear me through the door. I explained that a man I knew was trying to break in, that he was unstable, that I was afraid. Saying the words aloud created a crack in something I did not realize I had been holding together. "Help is on the way," the dispatcher said, her tone calm, practiced. "Stay where you are. Do not confront him." I stayed pressed against the hallway wall, listening to the pounding continue until the distant rise of sirens grew louder. Connor must have heard them because the banging stopped abruptly. Silence dropped so suddenly it rang in my ears. I peeked through the window again and saw him dart across the alley, disappearing behind a row of bushes before 2 officers pulled up. When the police knocked on my door, I opened it with shaky hands, embarrassed by how fragile my voice sounded as I explained what had happened. They took my statement, glanced at the dented garage door, and asked if he had threatened me directly. I told them about the messages earlier in the week, but admitted that I had deleted them. One officer sighed in a way that was almost sympathetic. Without clear evidence, there was little they could do beyond filing an incident report. "If he comes back, call us immediately." They drove away, leaving blue and red reflections fading across my driveway. I stood there long after their car disappeared, hugging my arms around myself while the sky darkened. As the adrenaline ebbed, a swell of emotion rose in its place, a tangled mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. I locked my doors twice that night and checked the windows more times than I could count. I slept lightly, waking at every noise, my mind replaying the scene in loops. The next morning brought a phone call from my mother. I knew before I answered that Connor must have told her his version of the story. Her tone confirmed it. "Emily, what did you do?" The words stung with such unfairness I nearly dropped the phone. "What did I do? He came to my house. He tried to break in." Mom exhaled sharply as if my logic inconvenienced her. "You should not have called the police. He is your brother. He was upset. Upset people do stupid things. Not stupid enough to justify involving law enforcement." My grip tightened around the phone. "Mom, he scared me. He damaged my property. He threatened me earlier this week. She cut me off. He told me you provoked him again. You know how sensitive he is lately. And he said, 'You have been cold to him.'" Cold. The word reverberated through my mind. Not frightened, not endangered. Cold. Somehow I was responsible for his violence because I did not offer him the warmth he believed he deserved. Her voice softened slightly, but held the weight of accusation. "You are tearing this family apart." I hung up before my frustration spilled into tears. I refused to let myself break again under the same tired script. Instead, I paced the apartment and pressed my palms together to stop them from shaking. The reality settled slowly, like dust drifting through still air. Connor's aggression was escalating, and the family pattern of dismissing it was as predictable as sunrise. He hurt people. They excused him. He threatened me. They blamed me. I knew then the barbecue would not be a simple gathering. He would be there. He would be drinking. He would be angry that I had called the police. He would be primed for conflict. That night, I drove to a hardware store before closing and bought an extra lock for my door. The cashier made small talk, but I barely registered the words. On the drive home, a full moon hung above the mountains, casting a pale glow that reminded me of childhood nights when I had watched its light spill through my bedroom window as Connor's footsteps pounded down the hallway. I remembered curling under my covers, wishing someone would intervene, wishing someone would protect me, wishing my mother would stop pretending everything was fine. But no rescue came then, and none was coming now. I realized the weight of safeguarding myself fell entirely on my shoulders. By the time Sunday morning arrived, my nerves felt frayed. I dressed mechanically and prepared the dessert my mother had insisted on, as if fulfilling the request might somehow soften the tension she refused to acknowledge. During the drive, I rehearsed calm responses and deep breaths, strategies I taught others but rarely used for myself. I told myself to stay alert, to be cautious, to keep distance, to leave early if needed. Yet nothing could have prepared me for how quickly everything would spiral once I stepped into that backyard. The incident before the grill had not been a warning, it had been a preview, and I had ignored it because facing the truth felt too heavy. Still, the truth waited patient and unyielding. It would not be ignored much longer. The world did not return all at once after Connor shoved me into the burning grill. Instead, it came back in fragments the way light filters through fog, slow and uncertain, each detail sharpening with painful clarity. I remember the heat first, a blistering pulse across my back that throbbed in waves. Then the smell charred cotton mixed with something far more intimate and horrifying, the faint scent of my own skin, singed by metal, glowing with residual flame. Voices swelled around me, but they sounded distant, like I was hearing them through water. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Someone else gasped. A cousin whispered, "Is she okay?" But no one stepped forward. No one reached for me, not even as I straightened and forced myself to breathe through the shock that sent tremors through my chest. Connor stood frozen, beer dangling forgotten in his hand, expression hardening into something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction before he caught himself and masked it with feigned concern. "You should not have stood so close to the grill." He said, his tone artificially light, as though we were discussing nothing more consequential than a minor kitchen accident. "That is on you." His words blurred at the edges, but the meaning sliced cleanly. My mother rushed toward me, but instead of worry, her eyes flashed with accusation. "Emily, what were you thinking, getting in his way?" she snapped. "Look at the scene you have caused." My breath hitched. Pain flared down my spine and radiated through my ribs as I pressed a hand to my lower back. The fabric had melted slightly into my skin. Even the lightest touch sent white bright agony through me. I felt tears prick behind my eyes but refused to let them fall. Crying would only feed the narrative they already believed, that I was dramatic, that I invited trouble, that I existed as a magnet for conflict wherever my brother was involved. People resumed talking in low, uneasy murmurs. My uncle pretended to rearrange utensils. An aunt picked up a fallen napkin, avoiding my eyes, as though contact might obligate her to intervene. Children stared openly before their parents gently turned their heads away. The bystander effect wrapped the yard like a thick fog. No one wanted to see what was happening, because acknowledging it meant acknowledging they had witnessed years of smaller cruelties and done nothing. I forced myself to speak, though my throat felt tight. "I need to go to urgent care." The words came out steady, even as the rest of me trembled. My mother's lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "You are overreacting. It is a minor burn. Just rinse it with cool water. We still have food to serve." The dismissal landed harder than the heat itself. A part of me had hoped that shock might shake loose some maternal instinct buried deep inside her. But old patterns cling hard. She would always bend logic to protect Connor, even if it meant contorting the truth until it resembled something unrecognizable. Connor looked at me with narrowed eyes, studying my reaction. For a moment, I thought I saw fear flicker in his gaze. Not fear for me, but fear of consequences. He took a step forward, as if to challenge me again, and my entire body tensed. Before he could speak, I stepped back, raising a hand in warning. "Do not come near me." The words slipped out sharp and instinctual, breaking decades of silence. A hush washed over the yard. Connor's jaw clenched. Mom gasped. But I held my ground even as my spine screamed in protest. I turned and walked toward the gate, ignoring the murmurs echoing behind me. The mountains beyond the fence blurred through my swimming vision. My steps felt uneven, each movement tugging at the raw, burned skin beneath my shirt. When I reached my car, I gripped the doorframe and breathed through another surge of pain. Sitting was excruciating, but driving away felt like the only way to reclaim any sense of control. I pulled onto the highway, blinking away tears that burned more fiercely than the injury itself. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the seat beside me. I knew without looking that it was my mother. I let it ring. The pain intensified the longer I drove until each breath felt like it stretched my skin too tight. When I finally reached the urgent care clinic, the nurse at the front desk took one look at my face and ushered me back without waiting for paperwork. The fluorescent lights made me squint as she guided me toward an exam room. "What happened, honey?" she asked, gentle and steady. The kind of voice trained to approach trauma without judgment. I opened my mouth, but the words snagged on old conditioning. 1,000 memories of my mother's warnings flooded forward. Do not embarrass the family. Do not exaggerate. Do not make him look bad. I swallowed hard and forced a neutral tone. I leaned back into a grill. The nurse paused, her eyes searching mine as if she could see the truth hiding behind the lie. She said nothing, though her expression softened in a way that told me she had heard many stories that began with lies meant to protect the wrong person. The doctor entered soon after, a calm woman with silver streaks in her hair. She asked me to lift my shirt just enough for her to assess the injury. When the fabric peeled away from my skin, I winced, gripping the edge of the exam table. She examined the burn with practiced efficiency. "Degree 1 to 2, she said. "Painful, but manageable. You came in quickly, which is good." As she applied cooling gel, a sigh escaped me, half relief, half shame. She glanced at my face again. "Did someone do this to you?" The question pierced deeper than the burn. I hesitated, feeling the familiar pull between truth and habit. Her voice remained gentle. "We see this kind of injury sometimes in situations where someone is pushed or forced against heat. If that is the case, we can help." I lowered my gaze. "No, it was an accident." The doctor did not argue, but her silence spoke volumes. She handed me a brochure before she left the room. Domestic Violence Resources. It lay in my lap like a spotlight, exposing everything I had tried to minimize. Shame rose hot in my chest, not because the brochure was inaccurate, but because it was devastatingly accurate. I had spent my entire life believing domestic violence had a narrow definition, one that applied only to intimate partners, not siblings, not family gatherings, not a childhood shaped by fear masquerading as devotion. But the truth sat heavy in my hands. Violence was violence even when bloodlines blurred it. The nurse returned with supplies and a kind smile that did not pity me. As she helped adjust the bandage, she said softly, "Just remember, accidents rarely leave bruises on the heart." Something cracked inside me, then a brittle, soundless fracture that made room for clarity. I walked out of the clinic with a slow, measured step, bracing for the pain radiating through my back. The early evening sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. I inhaled cool air, letting it settle deep inside me. When I reached my car, I sat still for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel while the doctor's question echoed through my mind. "Did someone do this to you?" For the first time, I allowed myself to answer honestly inside my own head. Yes, someone did. Someone who had been hurting me long before this burn. Someone my family worshipped at the expense of my safety. Someone who would keep hurting me until I drew a boundary strong enough to stop him. If I do not draw a boundary now, I may not survive the next time. The thought crystallized with chilling clarity. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, true. The rest of the family might continue pretending nothing was wrong, but I no longer had the luxury of denial. The shame that had once silenced me shifted into something sharper, a resolve that pulsed like new fire beneath my ribs. I started the engine, feeling the vibration steady me. The road ahead blurred momentarily through tears I could not hold back, but they were not tears of weakness. They were grief for every version of myself that had endured instead of resisted. As I pulled out of the parking lot, the mountains rose ahead, tall and unmovable, reminding me that strength does not come from silence, but from standing firm, even when the world around you demands your surrender. This time I would not surrender. This time I would not go quiet. And this time I would not give in. The Monday after the barbecue felt unnaturally bright, the kind of Colorado morning where the sun poured down like forgiveness too gentle and too generous for someone who felt as bruised inside as I did. I moved slowly through my apartment, each step tugging at the bandage beneath my shirt. Even the softest fabric sent sparks of pain across my back. I should have taken the day off, but solitude inside these walls felt dangerous. Silence made room for memory, and memory still held the image of my mother's face twisted in blame. The sound of Connor's laugh when he realized no one would hold him accountable. So I went to work. I told myself routine would steady me. Instead, it exposed every fracture I had been ignoring. At the office, people greeted me with warmth, asking about my weekend, about the barbecue they assumed had been wholesome and uneventful. I responded with practiced smiles, careful nods, half-truths that slid out too easily. My ability to hide pain had been honed over decades, but Marianne saw through it instantly. She always did. She was in her late 50s with streaks of silver in her hair and a presence that filled a room not with noise but with certainty. She had spent 20 years in public health before shifting to advocacy for women surviving domestic violence, though she rarely spoke about her own history except in small fragments offered with careful intention. She was the closest thing I had to a mentor, and more quietly, the closest thing I had to family who actually saw me. That morning, she stepped into my office without knocking and closed the door gently behind her. I looked up, trying to compose my expression, but her eyes went straight to the stiffness in my posture, the guarded way I held myself away from the chair back. Her voice was soft but firm when she asked what happened. Not a question wrapped in politeness. Not a question meant to be dodged. A question weighted with recognition. I opened my mouth, prepared to lie, but grief rose too quickly. My breath hitched. Marianne crossed the room without hesitation and set a mug of tea on my desk. "Honey Lavender, you look like you have not slept in days," she said quietly. "Sit. Tell me." The compassion in her tone cracked something already weakening inside me. Tears threatened, but I blinked hard, unwilling to unravel completely. I told her pieces, at first small neutral facts. A barbecue. A shove. A burn. But Marianne waited in the silence between my sentences, not flinching, not rushing, just holding space the way few people knew how. When I finally told her everything, the room felt different, like air shifting in a storm. She listened without interrupting, her face steady, her eyes sharpening with each detail. When I finished, the quiet stretched long enough that I wondered if I had said too much. Then she spoke. "Sweetheart," she said slowly, and the word landed like a warm hand on my shoulder. "Abuse does not become less dangerous because the person shares your blood. Family violence is still violence." My throat tightened. I knew this on an intellectual level. I had taught seminars on violence prevention, discussed risk factors in community meetings, handed out brochures just like the one lying on my passenger seat right now. But hearing it applied to my own life felt like stepping onto unfamiliar ground. Marianne leaned forward, her gaze steady. "You need support. Not from your mother. Not from anyone who has been excusing his behavior. From people trained to help you stay safe." The word safe rippled through me, foreign and heavy. I had never applied it to myself. I told her I was fine, that it was an isolated incident, that I could manage. She pressed her lips together, not with frustration, but with the patience of someone who had once believed the same lies about her own pain. "Emily," she said, "I have seen this progression too many times. It escalates. It always escalates. Until the victim does something hard enough to change the pattern, or until something irreversible happens." For a moment, I could not breathe. The truth of her words pressed against my ribs, relentless. Marianne reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were cards, numbers, pamphlets. A domestic violence hotline, a lawyer she trusted, a local advocacy group that provided safety planning, counselors specialized in trauma. She placed them gently on my desk as though she were offering tools rather than salvation. "You do not have to decide anything today," she said, "but you need to know your options, and you need to know this is not your fault." My eyes burned. I did not want pity, yet there was none in her expression. Only clarity. Only truth. I glanced away, unsure if I could handle the intensity of her understanding. Marianne hesitated for a heartbeat before speaking again, her voice steadier, lower. "I had someone like your brother once. A sibling. Older. Everyone excused her anger. Everyone said she was going through a lot. Everyone said I should understand." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. It did not stop until I stopped carrying it for her. She had never told me this, not in all our years working together. I felt my breath catch. Her revelation hung between us like a lifeline. Marianne squeezed my hand gently, then released it. You are not alone in this. And you do not have to stay quiet anymore. The edges of my world shifted then, as though someone had opened a door I never knew existed. The silence I had lived in since childhood was not normal. The pain was not necessary. The fear was not inevitable. There was another way, a right way, and Marianne was offering me the first step. After she left, I sat staring at the stack of resources she had given me. My heartbeat slowed each thud, a reminder of the decision forming inside me. Not fully shaped yet, but unmistakable. That afternoon, during a break between meetings, I called the hotline number Marianne had circled. A woman answered with a voice that reminded me of warm blankets and steady hands. She asked questions, gently encouraging me to go only as far as I was comfortable. When I described Connor's behavior, her tone did not change. She did not gasp or question or minimize. She said calmly, "This is abuse, and you deserve safety." Then she helped me consider safety planning measures, things I had never thought about. Steps that sounded both terrifying and liberating. Changing locks, documenting damage, saving threatening messages, identifying trusted contacts, keeping an emergency bag somewhere he would never find it. I felt strange taking notes as though I were studying someone else's life, but each word made my own life clearer. When I hung up, I breathed deeply for the first time since the barbecue. The next day, Marianne found me in the hallway and asked gently how I was doing. I hesitated, but finally said I called them. She smiled softly. Good. That was brave. It did not feel brave. It felt like admitting weakness, except deep down, I knew it was the opposite. It was the first crack in the walls I had built around my own suffering. She invited me to lunch, not the casual invitation coworkers sometimes make, but an intentional gesture. She took me to a small cafe tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore, a quiet place with warm lighting and mismatched mugs. The moment we sat, she said, "You are in the middle of something you cannot manage alone. And that is okay." Her honesty made something shift inside my chest. Shame tangled with relief. I found myself speaking more openly than I had with anyone in years. I told her about the way Connor hovered like a second shadow over my childhood, about my mother's relentless denial, about the fear that had crept into every corner of my adult life without me noticing. Marianne listened, nodding slowly, never flinching at the darker parts. When I finished, she said, "Abuse thrives in silence. You have been carrying a weight that was never yours to carry. Let us help you put it down." That afternoon, she introduced me to one of her contacts, a domestic violence attorney named Erica, who specialized in high-conflict family cases. Erica spoke with precision and empathy, explaining my legal rights, what constituted ongoing harassment, the process for filing restraining orders, and how evidence could be gathered safely. She never pushed. She never implied urgency. She simply provided a map. And for the first time in my life, I realized my path did not have to lead back to fear. That evening, I returned home with a folder full of information, a phone full of saved contacts, and a mind full of terrifying possibilities. Yet beneath the fear, there was something else, something fierce and quiet. A seed of empowerment that Marianne had planted simply by believing me. I stood by my window looking out at the mountains as dusk settled over the skyline. The world outside felt vast and steady, unbroken by my family's dysfunction. I touched the bandage on my back and whispered a truth I had never dared to say aloud. I deserve to be safe. The next morning, I walked into work feeling different, fragile but upright, scared but resolute. Marianne passed me in the hallway and gave a small nod, an unspoken reminder that I was not alone. And for the first time in 28 years, I felt the slightest shift in the ground beneath me. A tremor of change. A hint of freedom, a voice of truth rising after a lifetime of silence. And it came from an ally who did not share my blood, but shared something far more powerful. The belief that I mattered. Once Marianne opened the door to truth, it refused to close again. Even in the quiet moments, even when fear tugged at me like a persistent child, Even when I wanted to retreat into old habits of denial, the awareness stayed. It shadowed me through every hallway at work, every drive home, every nighttime routine where I checked my locks twice instead of once. And with that awareness came a new responsibility, one I had spent years avoiding. I had to protect myself, not in theory, not in whispered hopes, in action. Real, deliberate, documented action. Erica, the attorney. Marianne introduced me to said something during our first meeting that looped through my mind like a calm but unyielding mantra. The law responds to evidence, not feelings. If you want protection, you must gather what shows the truth. That sentence became the spine of my days. I began small because small felt manageable. The first step was saving everything. Every voicemail Connor had left in recent months. Every text where his tone shifted from guilt to rage. Every message where he blamed me for Mom's stress or accused me of abandoning the family. I forwarded them to a secure folder labeling each according to date and context. The act felt strangely intimate, like observing my own history from a distance. Seeing the words in black and white made the cruelty impossible to minimize. It stripped away the emotional fog my family always used to disguise it. Next came documenting the physical damage. I stood in my garage with a camera, the afternoon light cutting across the dented metal door Connor had pounded on. Each dent told a story I had tried to erase. I took pictures from multiple angles, zoomed in on the way the paint had chipped, recorded a video where I described the sound of his fists slamming against it. My voice shook not from fear, but from the gravity of acknowledging the truth out loud. I uploaded everything to a cloud drive only I could access using a password no one in my family could guess. Then came the hospital visit. I requested my medical records, including photos the clinic had taken of the burn. When the packet arrived, I stared at the images for a long time, unable to look away from the angry red imprint forming across my back. It was undeniable. A physical map of pain carved into my skin by someone who claimed to love me. Evidence. Erica's voice reminded me again. Not feelings. Evidence. I printed copies, stored them in a folder, and then hid the folder inside a suitcase beneath my winter clothes. The next stage was harder. Recording interactions. Colorado is a one-party consent state for audio recordings, something Erica explained carefully. You must only be present for the conversation, she said. You cannot record private conversations you are not involved in, but if your mother calls you and blames you again if he shows up, keep your phone nearby. I hated the idea at first. It felt sneaky wrong somehow, like violating an unwritten rule about family. But then I remembered Connor looming in the parking lot, threatening me with a whisper that chilled my bones. I remembered the grill searing into my back and my mother's voice slicing through the air, blaming me for my own injury. And I realized the unwritten rules of my family were designed to protect the abuser, not the abused. So I recorded. The first recording happened by accident. My mother called 2 days after the urgent care visit. I answered hesitantly, bracing myself. Sure enough, her tone was tight with frustration. "Your brother is hurt," she said. "He feels like you betrayed him, calling the police and making him look unstable." My pulse quickened. I hit the record button. "Mom, he tried to break into my home." I could hear my own voice trembling but firm. "You do not know what stress he is under," she said. "He has a lot on his shoulders. He needs us to support him. He needs you to behave." The way she said behave triggered something deep inside me, a childhood reflex, a command meant to keep me small. But hearing it recorded, hearing her normalize his violence with such casualness, stripped away the illusion. This was not protection. This was indoctrination, a cycle I had been trained into since birth. I saved the recording, labeled it, added it to the folder. Evidence, not feelings. Evidence. A few days later, it escalated again. Connor emailed me from a different address since I had blocked his number. The subject line read, "You asked for it." Inside was a long paragraph of threats woven between insults. He called me selfish, cold, ungrateful. Said I had turned Mom against him. Said if I kept acting like this, something bad would happen and it would be my fault. The language was vague enough to maintain plausible deniability, but sharp enough that the threat felt real, visceral, unmistakable. I forwarded the email to Erica. Her response came minutes later. "Save this. This is substantial." The next morning, I walked through the quiet of my apartment, taking inventory like someone preparing for a storm evacuation. What did I need easy access to? What needed to be hidden? I packed an emergency bag the way the hotline counselor had suggested. A spare set of keys, a copy of my medical records, USB drives containing screenshots and recordings, basic toiletries, a change of clothes, extra cash. I tucked it behind a cluster of storage bins in the hall closet where Connor would never notice if he somehow forced his way inside. I added a charger and a prepaid phone Marianne insisted I purchase her tone, leaving no room for debate. "If he destroys your phone," she said, "you will need a backup." Hearing those words out loud made me swallow hard. Destroy my phone. The idea felt dramatic, yet entirely plausible. I realized then how deeply I had normalized danger, how easily I had convinced myself his rage was contained to childhood or adolescence or certain moods. But rage is not seasonal. Rage grows. It spreads. It adapts. And Connor's had evolved into something unpredictable. Documenting became a habit, a muscle memory. Every conversation with my mother, every attempt Connor made to contact me, every detail of his escalating behavior. I kept a running log on my laptop, each entry time-stamped, each description precise. At first, writing it felt like betrayal, but soon it felt like liberation. Seeing the pattern laid out chronologically made one truth impossible to deny. This was not a strained sibling relationship. This was a cycle of inherited violence disguised as loyalty, and I was finally stepping out of it. One night while writing an entry, I paused and stared at the screen. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the full reality. I was building a case, not to punish him, but to survive him. The thought sent a chill down my spine, because it meant acknowledging that my brother was not simply broken or stressed or misunderstood. He was dangerous, and he had always been dangerous. I just had not been allowed to see it. On Friday afternoon, as I left the office, a familiar unease prickled at the back of my neck. I scanned the parking lot automatically, but saw no sign of him. Still, I felt watched. Not by Connor, by the truth itself. The evidence I had gathered formed a new kind of protection, but also a new kind of fear. Because once you gather the truth, you can no longer pretend it does not exist. That evening, I sat on my couch surrounded by folders, screenshots, printed emails, and a notebook filled with dates and incidents. My apartment felt like a war room. I touched the edge of the hospital photo, the image of my burned back, angry and raw, and I whispered not a promise, but a declaration. I am not going to be afraid forever. Evidence was power. Evidence was clarity. Evidence was the foundation of the boundary I was beginning to build. And soon, that boundary would be tested in ways I had spent my entire life trying not to imagine. The week after I began gathering evidence felt strangely suspended, as if time itself were hesitating, waiting for the next fracture in a structure that had been unstable for decades. I moved through my days with an alertness that felt both exhausting and necessary. The same hypervigilance I had learned in childhood now sharpened to an uncomfortable edge. I kept my emergency bag by the closet door. I charged both my regular phone and the prepaid backup Marianne insisted I buy. I checked the peephole every night before bed, but even with caution woven into every routine, I still was not prepared for how quickly things would escalate. It began on a Wednesday morning, ordinary in every visible way. I was at work reviewing logistics for an upcoming health fair when my supervisor stopped by my office. A quick word, she said, her tone clipped in a way that made my stomach drop. She gestured toward the conference room and closed the door behind us. Her expression tightened with concern. "Emily, we had someone at the front desk asking for you earlier today." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Who?" She hesitated before answering. "A man, mid-30s, agitated. He said he was your brother. Even though I knew the answer, hearing it spoken aloud made something inside me tremble. What did he say? She sighed, folding her arms. He demanded to see you. He told the receptionist he was here to settle something. He raised his voice when she explained he needed an appointment to meet with staff. We had to get security to escort him out. My hands went cold. Did he hurt anyone? No, she said quickly, though agitation flickered through her tone. But it was disruptive and unsettling. She sat across from me, her gaze steady. Emily, is everything okay? This is not the first time your brother has called here. You know that, right? I closed my eyes for a second. Of course I knew. The voicemails, the attempts to reach me through coworkers. I just had not realized how visible it had become. I swallowed, my voice barely audible. I am handling it. Her stare softened. And does handling it include keeping yourself safe? The question hit hard. I managed a small nod, though we both knew the truth was more complicated. We worked in public health. We preached prevention. We taught people how to recognize red flags, but applying those lessons to my own life still felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. She released a slow breath. If he comes back, we will contact the police immediately. I want you to know that. You do not have to navigate this alone. Gratitude rose in my chest like a sudden ache. Not the fragile gratitude of childhood where every scrap of kindness felt like a miracle, but real gratitude, grounded and adult. I thanked her, then stepped out of the conference room on legs that felt unsteady. My phone buzzed as I walked back to my office. A call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. Then a text. Call me now. It felt like pressure tightening around my ribs. When I finally answered, she did not bother with hello. What did you do to your brother? Her voice cracked with fury. He showed up at your job and they treated him like a criminal. Do you understand how humiliated he feels? Something inside me snapped at the absurdity. How humiliated he feels. Connor showed up threatening me. At my workplace. That is not normal, Mom. She scoffed. You embarrassed him. You pushed him to this. You keep provoking him with your behavior. I felt something icy settle in my stomach. Mom. I could lose my job over this. He cannot just show up and yell in a lobby. She huffed dramatically the way she always did when reality refused to bend to her denial. He is hurting. He needs you. You used to understand that. Before you started acting better than us. A familiar twist of guilt flared, but this time it collided with the truth I could no longer ignore. I pressed record on my phone, steadying my tone. Mom, he is dangerous. He shoved me into a grill. He tried to break into my home. He showed up at my workplace threatening me. How much more needs to happen before you stop defending him? Silence. Heavy, charged, furious. Then she said the words that sliced so deeply I felt them echo through my bones. You are tearing this family apart, Emily. If you keep this up, you will lose us, not lose Connor. Lose us. As if the entire family's loyalty orbited his violence. As if protecting myself were the betrayal. I ended the call. Not angrily, not dramatically. Calmly. Too calmly. Because I finally understood something Marianne had been trying to show me. My mother's denial was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice, and she had made it long ago. She had chosen Connor's story over my safety. She had chosen the illusion of harmony over the truth of harm. I sat at my desk for several minutes, staring at my trembling hands. My pulse thudded in my ears. I pulled out the prepaid phone and texted Marianne. He came to my job. She replied almost instantly, "Come to my office. Now." Her voice when I stepped inside was controlled, but laced with urgency. "This is escalation," she said. "Serious escalation." He crossed boundaries that most abusers reach only after feeling their control slipping. Her words struck something deep. Yes, his control is slipping, because I am finally refusing to carry it. Erica joined us by phone. Did he threaten you directly? Yes. Did he appear unannounced in multiple places? Yes. Did others witness his behavior? Yes. Then you have what we need, she said, her voice clear, calm, determined. Emily, it is time to file." The room felt heavier, the air charged with a revelation I had been both fearing and preparing for. This was no longer about documenting. This was no longer about planning. This was the moment the planning became action, the moment fear transformed into necessity. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with every light on the shadows outside stretching long across the pavement. My evidence folder lay open beside me. Hospital photos, emails, screenshots, voicemails, the recording of my mother blaming me for everything, the log of timestamps. It was all there. A map of violence I could no longer pretend was an accident of temperament or circumstance. Connor's behavior had not spiraled out of nowhere. It had escalated because that is what unchecked violence does. And now it was reaching a point where something irreversible could happen if I did not choose differently. I took a deep breath, pulled the restraining order forms toward me, picked up a pen, and wrote the truth. Not the softened version, not the family-approved version, the real version. The version I had carried alone for 28 years. And with each word I wrote, I felt the slightest shift inside me, fear moving aside, strength taking its place. Filing the restraining order should have felt like the moment everything snapped into place, but instead, it felt like stepping onto a bridge, suspended over a drop I could not see. Necessary, terrifying, irreversible. Erica met me outside the county courthouse that Friday morning, her presence steady and quiet in a way that made the chaos inside my chest feel almost manageable. She had a binder tucked under one arm, my evidence neatly organized into color-coded tabs. When she handed it to me, the weight startled me. Somehow, the physical heaviness of it made the emotional weight more real. She guided me through security, her tone calm, efficient, practiced, as if leading clients through this process was as normal as giving directions to a coffee shop. Maybe that was what I needed, someone who treated my terror like something survivable. The clerk behind the restraining order counter barely looked up as she asked for my name. Filing for protection was so routine here that it seemed administrative, almost transactional. But to me, it was tectonic. It was the moment I declared the truth without apology. When I handed over the paperwork, my hands shook. Erica gently placed her palm on the counter as if anchoring me. The clerk skimmed the documents, her expression shifting ever so slightly when she reached the photos of my burn. She paused, looked at me, and her voice softened. "We will fast-track this. Please, wait to the side." I nodded, unable to speak. 30 minutes later, they called my name. The judge, reviewing emergency protection orders, sat behind a tall desk in a private room that felt both clinical and intimidating. She wore reading glasses and scanned the documents with an expression that gave nothing away. When she looked up at me, I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "You are requesting a temporary civil protection order against your brother," she said. "Yes." Her eyes flicked to Erica briefly, then back to me. "The photos show a burn. Please explain how that happened." My throat constricted. Saying it aloud in front of a judge made everything feel sharper, more real, more undeniable. He pushed me into a grill at a family gathering. She did not blink, and the attempted break-in. I nodded. He came to my home. He hit my garage door repeatedly. I feared he would force his way inside. The judge tapped her pen on the desk. "The police report confirms officers responded." Then she asked the question I feared most. How long has this behavior been happening? Something inside me cracked open. 28 years, I whispered. The judge did not react with shock, pity, or melodrama, only clear-eyed understanding. And is it escalating? Yes. She signed the temporary protection order without hesitation. She instructed the clerk to serve Connor immediately, and then she looked at me with a seriousness so steady it made me feel seen in a way I had not felt seen by any adult in my life. "You did the right thing coming here. Do not doubt that." When we walked out of the courtroom, my knees nearly buckled. Erica caught my arm. "Breathe. You did well." Outside the courthouse, sunlight hit my face like a slap. I stood still for several seconds, letting the reality settle inside me. A legal boundary existed now, something no amount of denial, guilt, or family pressure could erase. But boundaries do not stop violence. They provoke it, and Connor reacted exactly the way everyone expected. The order was served at 6:30 that evening. By 6:32, my phone began vibrating nonstop. I had blocked his number, but he found new ways. Unknown callers, fake email addresses, even voice messages routed through apps. The first few were enraged. "You think a piece of paper protects you. You think you can ruin my life. You have no idea what you have started." I forwarded each one to Erica. She responded in minutes. "Save everything. He is building your case for you." But the messages kept coming. Some were quiet, unsettling in their restraint. "You really want to do this? To your own family?" And some were venom disguised as vulnerability. "Mom is crying because of you. Look what you are doing to her. You are destroying her." Then another one hit like a blow to the gut. "If you do not drop this, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." The phrasing was vague enough to avoid immediate arrest, but pointed enough to chill my blood. Erica flagged it as high concern. "This is escalating rapidly," she warned. "Document everything. We might need to push for a permanent order." The next day, my mother called 5 times. When I finally answered, her voice cracked with anger and disbelief. "How could you do this to your brother? Do you want him thrown in jail?" I exhaled slowly. "I want him to stop hurting me." She scoffed loudly. "He told me everything. You have exaggerated. You ruined our family's reputation filing something so shameful." I could feel my heart tightening. "Mom, he could have killed me." She did not pause. "If you do not drop this, your brother will lose everything. He might lose custody someday if he has a family. Is that what you want?" Her words hit me in the same place they always did, the small, tender space where guilt once lived. But this time, something was different. I recorded her calmly, and when she finished, I said the words she never expected from me. "I am done protecting him." Her breath hitched as if she had been slapped. I hung up. Not out of anger, out of necessity, because choosing myself was no longer optional. That weekend, Marianne insisted I stay with her. She did not ask. She simply handed me a spare key and said pack a bag. I drove to her house in the foothills, a place surrounded by tall pines and a view of the city lights that looked almost peaceful from that distance. When I arrived, she hugged me, careful of the healing burn, and guided me inside where the smell of soup simmering filled the air. For the first time in days, my shoulders loosened. On Sunday evening, the police called to notify me that Connor had attempted to show up at my apartment again. My neighbor had seen him circle the building twice, trying the side gate before driving off when he spotted patrol lights down the street. The officer said the visit violated the temporary protection order. "We can pick him up if he returns," he said, "or if you want to press charges for the violation." I declined for the moment, overwhelmed by how quickly everything was shifting, but the officer's tone was firm. "If he comes back again, call immediately. He does not get another warning." Marianne watched me hang up the phone. Her expression was steady assessing. "He knows," she said softly. "He knows he is losing control. That is why he is escalating." The thought made my stomach twist. That night, we reviewed all my evidence together. Dates, photos, emails, voicemails. The log I had kept since the night he tried to break in. Marianne helped me organize everything chronologically so the pattern was impossible to dismiss. It was astonishing how clear the timeline became when stripped of emotion. His anger, his threats, my silence, his escalation, my reaching for help, his retaliation. The more we assembled the pieces, the more undeniable the story became. And then Erica called with news I did not expect. The hearing for the permanent protection order was scheduled, sooner than anticipated. A courtroom, a judge, a decision that could legally and permanently separate me from the brother who had controlled my life for nearly 3 decades. It would be public. It would be recorded. He would be forced to face the consequences of his own actions. And my mother would be there, fighting against me, supporting him, pretending her version of reality was the truth. I felt my pulse accelerate, a thrum of fear mixed with something else. Anticipation. Relief. Justice. Marianne rested a hand on my shoulder. "You are not fighting him," she said. "You are fighting for yourself, for your life, for your safety, and you are doing it the right way." That night, I lay awake in the guest room staring at the faint outline of the mountains outside the window. The wind rustled the trees. The city glowed far below. My burn throbbed softly beneath its bandage. But somewhere beneath the pain, something stirred. Not fear, not guilt, strength. The kind of strength that grows only after you finally say enough. The hearing was coming. The truth was coming. And for once in my life, I was ready to meet it head on. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and windless, the kind of Colorado morning where the air feels too sharp to breathe and the sky hangs low enough to press against your thoughts. I woke before sunrise in Mary Ann's guest room, staring at the faint glow creeping across the ceiling. My stomach twisted with a trembling energy that was not quite fear and not quite courage, but something suspended between the two. For the first time since childhood, I was walking into a room where Connor's version of reality would not be the only one believed. That truth alone felt monumental. I dressed slowly, pulling on a soft blouse that would not irritate the healing burn on my back. Mary Ann brewed coffee while I gathered the binder of evidence, my hands shaking despite how many times I had reviewed each page. She squeezed my arm gently before we left. "Remember," she said, "this is not a trial about who is loved more. This is a hearing about safety." Safety, a word my family rarely used unless describing Connor's comfort. Today, it meant something different. At the courthouse, Erica waited by the metal detectors dressed in calm professionalism that made the chaos inside me feel almost manageable. She greeted me with a nod, not forcing a smile, just offering steadiness. "You are ready," she said, "even if you do not feel it." We climbed the stairs together, our footsteps echoing in the long hallway that led to courtroom 4B. When we entered, my breath caught. Connor sat at the far table with an attorney whose suit looked expensive and whose expression looked bored. My brother's posture was tight but calculated, his jaw cleanly shaved, his hair slicked back as though he were auditioning for a role he had already rehearsed. But his eyes flicked to mine for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, the mask slipped. Rage, sharp and electric, flashed beneath the surface. My mother sat beside him clutching tissues though she had not cried yet. When she saw me, her lips tightened into a line that was both pitying and accusing, the same expression she used when I scraped my knee as a child and cried too loudly for her liking. Erica guided me to our table without hesitation. "Sit tall," she whispered. "Never smaller than the truth you are telling." The judge entered a woman in her 60s with a firm posture and an expression that tolerated neither theatrics nor manipulation. She reviewed the case file briefly before looking up. "Ms. Dawson, Mr. Dawson, we are here to determine whether the temporary protection order should be made permanent. Both parties will have the opportunity to speak." Connor's attorney rose first, buttoning his jacket with deliberate poise. "Your Honor, my client is devastated to find himself here today. This entire matter," he said, gesturing toward me, "is a misunderstanding between siblings. A family dispute exaggerated into something it is not." Connor nodded solemnly, lowering his eyes as though carrying the weight of a tragedy. The performance would have been convincing to anyone who did not know him. But the judge gave no reaction. His attorney continued. "The alleged injuries were accidental, the alleged threats misinterpreted. My client has no history of violence and poses no danger to his sister." I felt my breath catch in my throat. No history of violence. He might as well have declared the sky green. Erica stood next. At first, her voice was measured almost gentle. Then, she began presenting evidence. The photographs of my burned back projected onto the courtroom screen. The timestamps of emails Connor had sent threatening retaliation. The police report documenting the attempted break-in. The audio recording of my mother blaming me for provoking him while ignoring the violence he inflicted. The courtroom felt smaller with each piece of truth spoken aloud. Connor shifted in his seat, his composed expression faltering. His attorney interjected repeatedly. "Objection speculative. Objection hearsay. Objection irrelevant." The judge overruled each one with the same unshakable tone. "The evidence speaks for itself." Then it was my turn. Erica rested a hand on my arm before I stood. You speak only to the judge, not to them, not to the past. The judge nodded toward me. Ms. Dawson, please explain in your own words why you are seeking a permanent order of protection. My legs felt like they were made of glass as I walked to the witness stand. I placed my hand on the rail, steadying myself. The oath blurred in my ears. When I finally spoke, my voice wavered only once. I told the judge about the barbecue, about the shove, about the burn and the hospital visit, about the years of verbal attacks, threats, intimidation, about the garage door pounding, about the day he showed up at my workplace angry and unpredictable, about the fear that had become a second skin. Halfway through my testimony, my mother burst into tears. Not for me, for him. She shook her head, whispering something to Connor, then to the attorney, as though she could rewrite reality through sheer force of emotional insistence. When I finished speaking, the judge leaned forward slightly. Ms. Dawson, you said this behavior has been ongoing since childhood. Why seek protection now? The question hit the deepest part of me. Because I finally realized I may not survive the next escalation unless the law steps in. The room went silent. Even Connor stilled. The judge turned to him. Mr. Dawson, do you have anything you wish to say? Connor stood abruptly, fists clenched at his sides. This is ridiculous, he snapped. She is lying. She is always lying. She loves making me look bad. She wants everything to be my fault. I felt the shift before I saw it. The judge's expression cooled. Mr. Dawson, control your tone. But he could not. His veneer cracked completely. She is the problem, not me. She is tearing this family apart. She is weak and dramatic and— The judge raised her hand sharply. Enough! Connor's attorney tugged at his sleeve, urging him to sit, but the damage was already done. The judge's voice cut through the room with precision. Being family does not exempt anyone from accountability. The words struck so cleanly I felt them lodge inside my chest like truth forged in steel. She reviewed the evidence one last time, then delivered her ruling without hesitation. The temporary protection order is hereby made permanent for a duration of 2 years. Mr. Dawson is prohibited from contacting Ms. Dawson directly or through third parties and prohibited from approaching her residence, workplace, or vehicle. Violation will result in immediate arrest. My breath left me in a slow, shaking release. Connor lunged forward as if to argue, but 2 security officers stepped closer instinctively. His face flushed, deep red fury tightening every feature. My mother reached for him with trembling hands. Connor, please don't. But the judge spoke again sharper. If he cannot comply, he will be removed from this courtroom. Silence fell. Heavy. Absolute. Connor sat, jaw clenched, eyes burning with a hatred that no longer held power over me. The gavel struck once. The hearing was over. I rose slowly from my seat, the binder of evidence still in my hands. Marianne watched from the back of the courtroom, tears shining in her eyes, though she did not cry. Erica squeezed my shoulder. You did it. Outside the courthouse, the air felt colder, cleaner, as though I were breathing something new for the first time. Freedom, safety, truth. I walked down the courthouse steps, not as the silent sister who once defined herself through endurance, but as someone who had finally chosen herself. And though the battle was not over, the ground beneath me felt steadier than it had in years. News travels fast in small Colorado towns, especially the kind where neighbors pretend not to stare while memorizing every detail. By the time I left the courthouse parking lot that afternoon, the ripple had already begun. I did not know it yet, but within hours, the story would spread from porch to porch, grocery aisle to grocery aisle, whispered with confusion. First, then certainty, then judgment, then something I never expected. Sympathy, support, quiet recognition from people who had watched my family from the outside for years. But the first sign arrived in the form of my aunt's voicemail. I had barely driven 10 minutes when my phone buzzed with her message. Emily, sweetheart, I did not know. Her voice trembled with something like remorse. We should have stepped in years ago. I replayed it twice, stunned. This was a woman who had spent my entire childhood praising Connor's spirit, while gently suggesting I learn to let things go for the sake of family harmony. Hearing her say we should have stepped in felt like wind hitting a locked window, rattling the frame, but revealing no clear path forward. The second message came from my cousin Jake, someone I had not spoken to in years except through polite holiday greetings. His tone was matter of fact. "I was there that day," he said, "at the barbecue. I saw what he did. If you need a witness for anything else, I am here." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. A witness. Someone had seen. Someone had finally said it out loud, but the messages did not stop. They multiplied throughout the evening until my voicemail icon glowed like a warning light. Some were brief apologies. Some were long, rambling confessions about moments people remembered, moments they had dismissed at the time, but now recognized as red flags. "Emily, I remember when he shoved you down the stairs when we were kids. Emily, he screamed at you during Thanksgiving and your mom acted like nothing happened. Emily, I was afraid to say anything back then. Emily, I am so sorry." Each message landed like a pebble dropped into a still lake, disturbing the reflection I had spent years constructing. I had always believed no one noticed that Connor's behavior lived in the private shadows of our home. But they had noticed. They had seen. They had simply done nothing. The weight of that truth pressed against me, equal parts validation and betrayal. Later that evening, Marianne made dinner, though I barely tasted it. My mind churned with the surreal new landscape I was stepping into, the one where people finally acknowledged what I had endured, even if decades too late. After we ate, I sat on her porch wrapped in a blanket as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The air smelled like pine and faint wood smoke, a scent that usually calmed me, but tonight only sharpened my awareness. Somewhere out there, Connor was raging, and somewhere next to him, my mother who had held him through every tantrum, every explosion, was fanning the flames with her denial. I did not have to wait long to hear from her. It was close to 9 when my phone lit up with her name. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Emily," she said, her voice strained, brittle trembling in that dramatic way she used when she wanted sympathy. "How could you humiliate your brother like that?" I closed my eyes. "Mom, he did this to himself." She exhaled a broken, wounded sound. "He is devastated. They served him at work. Everyone saw. Do you know what that does to a man?" My jaw clenched. "Do you know what it does to a woman to be shoved into a burning grill?" A silence stretched long and cold across the phone line. Then she said the sentence that crystallized everything, the sentence that finally shattered the last illusion of family I had been clinging to. "You should have handled this privately. Family matters stay in the family." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I tried handling it privately for 28 years. She flinched audibly as if wounded by my honesty. Then she whispered, almost desperate, "If you do not drop this order, we will lose him." Something inside me broke at those words, not in a painful way, but in a freeing one. She had chosen. She had always chosen. And now she was simply saying it out loud. "Mom," I said quietly, "you lost me a long time ago when you refused to protect me." She began crying, then real or performed, I still cannot say. I hung up before the guilt could seep into my bloodstream again. I sat on the porch, breathing in the cool night air, letting the silence settle around me. The mountains stood tall and dark in the distance, steady in a way humans rarely are. My phone buzzed again, but this time the name pulled my breath into my chest. Pastor Green. The same pastor who had counseled my parents after my father died, who had watched Connor grow into a storm of entitlement, who led the church where we spent countless Sundays pretending to be a perfect family. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Emily." He began, his voice thick with age and something heavier. "I owe you an apology." The words stunned me more than the courthouse ruling. He continued, slowly measured. "I saw signs when you were young. I saw how your brother treated you. I thought your mother would correct it. I should have said something. I should have done something." My throat tightened. "It is not your responsibility to fix my family." "No," he replied gently, But I could have prevented some of your pain, and I did not. Silence settled between us. Then he added, Emily, protecting yourself is not a sin, it is wisdom. Wisdom earned through suffering. I swallowed hard. Thank you. After he hung up, I stared into the night. My breath fogged in the cool air, and slowly the world began to feel different. The truth was no longer mine alone. Other people finally acknowledged it. The community I once believed would never understand now stepped forward in quiet ways, small but meaningful. But not everyone supported me. The next message came from a family friend who said she was heartbroken to see siblings fight like this. Another urged me to reconsider reconciliation for the sake of family unity. One even accused me of dramatizing the situation for attention, but these opinions no longer clung to me the way they once did. For the first time, their expectations felt smaller than my need for safety, smaller than my right to exist without fear. One moment from that week remains carved sharply in my memory. I went to buy groceries with Marianne, a simple errand that had once been mundane. As we walked down the aisle, a woman from our hometown approached me cautiously. She was a few years older, someone I remembered vaguely from holiday gatherings. When she reached me, her voice trembled. I know what you did, filing that order, and I want you to know. I wish I had done the same with my own brother years ago. My chest tightened. She offered a small, painful smile. You are braver than you think. I watched her walk away, stunned by how many people carried stories like mine in silence. That was the reckoning unfolding around me, not just for my family, but for the entire community. People could no longer pretend Connor's behavior was harmless or excusable. The truth was out, and truth does not shrink back once exposed. But the greatest reckoning happened inside me. For the first time, I understood that community is not defined by blood or expectation, but by those who stand with you when the truth finally rises. Some people stepped forward, some stepped away, and for the first time in my life, I did not chase the ones who left. In the weeks after the court hearing, something inside me began to loosen like a fist that had been clenched for decades, finally releasing its grip. It did not happen all at once. Healing rarely does. It came in small, almost imperceptible shifts, moments I might have overlooked if I had not learned the hard way that survival is built on noticing what others ignore. For the first time since childhood, my mornings did not begin with anxiety buzzing through my veins. I no longer jolted awake wondering if a message from Connor waited on my phone, or if my mother had left another guilt-laced voicemail. Instead, I woke to soft light filtering through the curtains and the quiet hum of my apartment, a sound that felt like safety. Therapy helped. Not the quick fix kind people talk about casually, but the slow, layered kind that unravels years of beliefs woven so tightly into your identity that pulling a single thread can feel like unraveling your entire sense of self. My therapist, Dr. Hayes, had a calm presence that disarmed me. During our first session, I sat stiff-backed on her couch while she studied me with gentle attentiveness. You have lived in survival mode for so long, she said, her voice steady that safety might feel unfamiliar. She was right. There were days early on when the absence of chaos felt strange, like stepping into a room where the furniture had been rearranged overnight. I kept waiting for something to explode, for Connor to violate the order, for my mother to show up at my door demanding answers I no longer owed her. But the explosions did not come. What came instead were the memories. Not the clear kind that arrive like photographs, but fragments, sensations, echoes. At night, I would remember hiding under my blanket as a child while Connor stomped down the hallway, the thud reverberating in my bones. Or the sharp sting of shame when my mother scolded me for overreacting after he shoved me against the refrigerator. Or the way I learned to fold myself smaller in public so no one would accuse me of provoking him. These memories surfaced not to torment me, but to be acknowledged. Dr. Hayes said this was common. Childhood wounds do not vanish simply because you survive adulthood. They resurface when you finally create enough safety for them to be understood. In therapy, I learned words for experiences I had never dared to name. Emotional neglect, enmeshment, triangulation. I learned that family loyalty is often misused as a weapon against the one who disrupts the pattern. I learned that silence is not peace and that boundaries are not cruelty. The more I learned, the clearer everything became. Meanwhile, life outside the office moved on. My job offered me a leadership role in a new health outreach initiative, a project designed to support at-risk families in rural areas. It was the kind of work I had dreamed of doing since graduate school, but believed I was not strong enough to lead. When my supervisor offered it to me, she said, "You have a steadiness people trust." For a moment, I could not speak. Steadiness. A word that once felt impossible, now used to describe me. I accepted the position. With the promotion came new responsibilities and an unexpected sense of pride. Projects moved forward. Grants were approved. My team respected me. They listened when I spoke. It was a world so different from the one I grew up in that sometimes I felt like I was inhabiting a different version of myself. Yet even in this new life, fragments of the old world lingered. One evening while preparing dinner, I received a call from Officer Ramos, the one who had handled Connor's initial incident. His tone was serious but calm. "I wanted to inform you that your brother was arrested earlier today for violating the restraining order." My stomach tightened, though the news should not have surprised me. "What happened?" "He attempted to enter your mother's home while intoxicated. She called for assistance." I paused. "She called?" I asked softly. He confirmed it. "Yes. She stated she was afraid for her safety." I thanked him and hung up, but the shock lingered long afterward. My mother, who had defended him relentlessly, who had berated me for seeking legal protection, had finally reached a breaking point. That night, I sat on my couch holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, only a quiet sadness for a lifetime of patterns neither of them had been willing to confront. But beneath that sadness was something steadier, relief. Not because Connor had been arrested, but because I no longer felt responsible for managing the chaos of people who refused to manage themselves. A few days later, my mother called. I let it ring until the voicemail picked up. The message she left was short, her voice small in a way I had never heard. "Emily, I think I understand now." That was all she said. I did not call back. Maybe someday I would. Maybe not. Healing does not require reopening every door. Some doors must remain closed for the sake of peace. As weeks passed, I began creating new rituals. On Saturdays, I hiked near the foothills, letting the crisp mountain air fill my lungs, as if reclaiming pieces of breath I had lost over decades. Every step felt like grounding, anchoring me to a life that belonged entirely to me. I bought plants for the apartment. Basil, rosemary, lavender. I cooked meals that reminded me of who I wanted to become, not who I had been forced to be. I read books late into the night without flinching at sudden noises. I laughed more often. Sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, sometimes for no reason at all except the rediscovery of joy itself. And yet, one of the most profound moments came on a quiet Tuesday evening. I was sorting old boxes, preparing to donate things I no longer needed when I found a childhood photo of myself at age 7. In the picture, I stood alone at a family cookout holding a paper plate with a single overcooked burger, smiling stiffly while Connor ran in the background with a toy sword. The memory hit me unexpectedly hard. I sat on my floor and stared at the photo for a long time, realizing that the girl in the picture had never known safety, had never been protected, had never been allowed to be a child. And yet she survived. She grew. She became me. I pressed the photo to my chest and whispered, "You made it." I did not expect the tears that followed, nor the soft release that came with them. That night, I lit a candle and wrote in my journal something I had not done consistently in years. I wrote about boundaries, how they are not walls meant to keep people out, but doors that define who gets to come in. I wrote about healing, how it is not linear, but cyclical, arriving in waves that wash over the past without erasing it. I wrote about Connor not with hatred, but with clarity. And I wrote about peace not as something earned, but as something chosen, breath by breath. By autumn, my life felt different in ways both subtle and profound. I had made new friends through work and community groups. I laughed more easily. I slept deeply. And for the first time since childhood, the world felt safe. One crisp October afternoon, I found myself driving to a quiet overlook in the mountains. The trees blazed gold and crimson leaves drifting like slow-moving sparks across the sky. I sat on a wooden bench, wrapped my jacket tighter, and breathed in the cool air. For a long time, I simply watched the mountains fade into dusk. Then a thought surfaced, gentle but certain. Silence was my prison. Boundaries became my freedom. And in that moment, I knew peaceful living was no longer something I had to chase. It was something I had built, something I had claimed, something I would never again surrender. When I stood to leave, the last light of the sun cast long shadows across the valley, and for the first time in my life, the shadows did not frighten me. They simply reminded me that darkness exists, but so does dawn, and I had finally learned how to walk toward the light on my own terms. In the months that followed, the contours of my life shifted so gradually that I did not recognize the transformation until one quiet morning in late winter. Snow had dusted the rooftops outside my apartment, and sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors in ribbons of pale gold. I stood at the kitchen counter, brewing coffee, listening to the soft drip as if it were a heartbeat. My heartbeat. My life. No longer shaped by fear, no longer bent around someone else's chaos. It was in these peaceful, ordinary moments that I realized I had begun building something I once believed impossible, a life that belonged only to me. The first step toward this new life came when I joined a support group for survivors of family-based violence. I hesitated the first evening I attended, standing outside the community center with my hands stuffed in my coat pockets, debating whether I should turn around. But when I finally walked into the small circle of chairs, no one asked me to justify my pain or explain my history. They simply nodded gently, silently in recognition. There were women whose brothers had terrorized them, men who grew up invisible beside explosive siblings, daughters who lived under the weight of mothers who never protected them, sons who were raised to be emotional caretakers to wounded parents. We shared stories that mirrored each other in haunting ways. The details differed, but the patterns were the same. Minimization, gaslighting, isolation, loyalty used as a cage. By the end of the first meeting, I felt something crack open inside me. Not a wound, but a door, a path out of silence. Over the next weeks, I began volunteering at the group, helping with sign-ins or arranging chairs, then offering to coordinate resources for newcomers. One night, a woman named Trina, whose older sister had been violent toward her for years, said quietly, "You listen like someone who understands." Her words settled deep in my chest. I realized then that healing was not just about stepping away from pain, but also about stepping toward others still trapped in it. So, I created something I had never seen before, something I desperately needed when I was younger, a small peer-led network called Siblings of Violence. Most support systems focused on intimate partner abuse or parental abuse. Sibling abuse was rarely discussed, almost taboo, treated as rivalry instead of trauma. But our experiences proved otherwise. Within a month, the group grew rapidly. People reached out privately, cautiously, afraid to name their experiences, but relieved to find someone who would not dismiss them. We met on Sunday evenings in a rented room above the library, sharing quiet stories over warm lights and mismatched chairs. Some cried, some sat in silence. Some laughed for the first time in years. The room became a sanctuary. Not because the pain was absent, but because everyone inside it finally had permission to stop carrying it alone. Through this work, I discovered a new kind of purpose, one rooted not in fixing others, but in creating a space where people could feel seen. And as I poured into them, something unexpected began to fill the hollow spaces inside me. Life at home blossomed too. I found a small condo overlooking the foothills, a place with wide windows and soft natural light that made even the coldest mornings feel warm. It was not luxurious, it was not impressive, but it was mine. When I signed the lease, the landlord asked if anyone else would be living there with me. I answered no, and the certainty in my voice startled me. Not because I expected to be alone forever, but because for the first time, the idea of being alone did not frighten me. Peace became a companion I was still learning to trust. On weekends, I took long drives through mountain roads, stopping at small trailheads to walk paths lined with towering pines. I carried a thermos of tea, sometimes hiking, until the sky turned saffron and the world went quiet except for the rustle of wind through the trees. These moments felt like conversations with my younger self, the girl who had once believed she had to shrink to survive. Look, I would think we are here now. We made it out. One afternoon in early spring, as I stood at an overlook watching the horizon burn pink and gold, I realized something profound. My definition of family had changed. Family was not the people who shared your blood. It was the people who showed up with gentleness when you expected judgment. The people who listened instead of accusing. The people who recognized your pain without demanding you rationalize it. Marianne had become family. My support group had become family. Even some colleagues, the ones who checked on me during the court process or dropped off soup when therapy sessions left me exhausted, had become family. And slowly, quietly, I became family to myself. A truth bloomed in my chest with surprising warmth. Choosing who belongs in your life is not rejection. It is self-protection. It is wisdom. It is love. In late spring, after months of waiting, the district attorney informed me that Connor had accepted a plea deal for violating the restraining order. He would be in court, mandated treatment and probation for the next year. The news landed softly. No triumph, no devastation. Just acknowledgement that accountability had finally slowly begun to find its way to him. My mother left one last voicemail after hearing the news. "I know you will not call me back," she said, her voice thin, "but you should know I am trying." For the first time in her life, she sounded unsure, and I let the voicemail sit in my inbox without responding. Healing does not always include reunion. Sometimes it includes distance that steadies your soul. As summer approached, I threw myself deeper into my work and the support group. We hosted our first workshop on recognizing sibling violence. People from across the county attended. One woman told me she had spent 40 years believing she had exaggerated her brother's cruelty. Hearing others speak helped her see the truth clearly for the first time. After the session, she hugged me and whispered, "You gave me my life back." But it was her words that echoed inside me later that night, reminding me that the path I had walked through fire now served as a lantern for others. One evening, I arrived home to find a small package at my door. Inside was a card from a member of my group. "Thank you," it read, "for showing us that peace is not a dream, but a boundary." I slid the card onto my bookshelf beside my favorite mug and a tiny plant I had rescued from the clearance rack. My life was no longer built on fear or obligation. It was built on intention, on gentleness, on choices I consciously made. And as the sun set outside my window that night, coloring the mountains in soft purples and fading gold, I felt something settle inside me with quiet certainty. I had not lost a family. I had gained one, a new one. One built not from blood, but from truth, compassion, and resilience. And in that moment, I knew this new life was not a consolation prize. It was the beginning of everything I had ever deserved. When I sit down to tell this part of the story, the final stretch, I always pause for a moment because it feels different from the rest. The earlier chapters were built on survival, on fear, on the long shadow of a home that taught me to swallow my pain so quietly that even I stopped hearing it. But this chapter is not about pain. It is about clarity. It is about choosing a life rather than inheriting one. And above all, it is about fighting back the right way, the only way that truly protects you, not just from others, but from the old versions of yourself that once believed endurance was the same thing as love. People sometimes ask what shifted in me, what turned fear into action, silence into truth. The answer is not dramatic. It was not a sudden burst of courage. It was not anger finally boiling over. It was the simple realization that if I did not draw a boundary, I would not survive the next time. That moment at the grill, the sound of sizzling metal against my back, the smell of my skin burning while my mother shouted at me instead of him, forced me to see a truth I had spent years avoiding. Some families do not break when you protect yourself. They break because they were already cracked to their foundation built on excuses and denial. When you finally step out of that system, you are not causing destruction. You are escaping it. Fighting back the right way did not begin with anger. It began with documentation, evidence, facts. It began with acknowledging reality instead of rewriting it to protect the people who hurt me. And I want you to hear this clearly wherever you are listening from tonight. That kind of fighting back is not betrayal. It is self-preservation. It is the highest form of courage. Maybe you grew up like I did with a sibling whose storms dictated the weather inside your home. Maybe you learned to walk quietly, breathe quietly, hope quietly. Maybe an adult in your life taught you that your safety was less important than keeping the peace. Maybe you heard the same sentence I did for decades: do not provoke him. He is struggling. He does not mean it. He will change. Give him another chance. Family is family. Let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Family is not defined by who shares your blood. Family is defined by who protects your peace. The moment I understood that my entire life began to shift. When I filed the restraining order, people whispered. Some questioned whether it was necessary. Some insisted I should have handled it privately. Some accused me of being dramatic or unforgiving. But none of those people were the ones waking up in fear, checking their locks twice, bracing for violent words or violent hands, or carrying decades of blame placed on the wrong shoulders. And none of them were standing beside me in the courtroom when the judge looked at my evidence and said the words I had needed to hear since childhood. Being family does not exempt anyone from accountability. If you take nothing else from my story, take this truth. Accountability is not cruelty. Boundaries are not punishment. Protection is not overreaction. Choosing yourself is not betrayal. When you fight back with the law with documentation, with support systems with truth instead of rage, you are not destroying your family. You are rescuing the part of yourself they taught you to ignore. And here is another truth, one I could not see at the beginning. Fighting back the right way will cost you things. It will cost you illusions. It will cost you relationships that were conditional on your silence. It will cost you the version of your mother you always wished existed. It will cost you the false hope that one day the person hurting you will suddenly wake up kind. But what you gain is so much greater than what you lose. You gain mornings without dread. You gain a future not built on fear. You gain friendships grounded in honesty. You gain a life where you can finally breathe without flinching. You gain yourself, and the people who truly love you will rise to meet you in that new life. When I stood on that overlook in the mountains months after the court hearing, watching the world fade into twilight, I realized something profound. The peace I felt was not a gift someone handed me. It was the result of every small decision I made to honor the truth instead of the story I had been expected to play. Fighting back the right way means choosing what protects you even when others do not understand, especially when others do not understand. It means documenting what happened even when part of you wants to look away. It means seeking legal help even when your family calls you dramatic. It means walking into a courtroom even when your knees shake. It means letting people go when holding on to them would pull you under. It means giving yourself permission to heal, even if the people who hurt you never apologize. And it means building a life shaped not by the violence you survived, but by the peace you finally claimed. One of the women from my support group once asked me, "Do you ever regret taking legal action?" I thought about her question long after she left that night. Regret is a strange thing. It attaches itself to things we long for but cannot change. But what I did was not something to regret. It was something I should have done years earlier. Something I hope someone listening tonight sees as permission to protect themselves sooner. When I look back now, I do not see the court order as the moment my family fell apart. I see it as the moment I stopped falling apart for them. Healing is not neat. It does not arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it looks like a quiet evening on your couch when you realize you are no longer afraid. Sometimes it looks like a message from someone who once doubted you now saying they understand. Sometimes it looks like standing on a trail at sunrise knowing you are finally free. And sometimes it looks like speaking your story out loud so the person listening can recognize their own. If you are listening to me now and something inside you is stirring something quiet and familiar, something that whispers, "This is my story too," then hear me clearly. You are not alone. You are not dramatic. You are not ungrateful. You are not betraying your family by protecting yourself. You are allowed to draw boundaries. You are allowed to demand safety. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to heal. And you are allowed to rebuild a life that feels like your own. If you have ever survived a family built on fear instead of love, you deserve peace too. So tell me gently, bravely, honestly, where are you listening from tonight?